He was a man forged in the crucible of war, a weapon honed by the quiet lethality of special operations, yet he sought a sanctuary from the very world he was sworn to protect. Caleb Cal Rourke had traded the suffocating dust of Afghanistan for the damp, clean air of the Pacific Northwest. Here, the only explosions were the crash of waves against the rocky shore, and the only screams were the cries of gulls circling over the steely grey water. His legacy was written in classified files and quiet commendations, a ghost in the machine of national defense, now trying to exorcise his own demons in the Cascade Mountains. His only constant, his only anchor to the present, was Silas. The Belgian Malinois was more than a dog. He was a four-legged extension of Cal's own will, a guardian with amber eyes that saw the fractures in his master's soul. Silas, too, was a veteran, a creature of instinct and training, whose loyalty was an absolute, a silent pact forged under the crack of gunfire and the whine of incoming rounds. They were two protectors without a charge, two guardians watching over an empty fortress of solitude. The fog of leave was a different kind of war, a quiet, insidious enemy that crept into the corners of his mind. He was escaping. He was a weapon without a target. His small cabin, perched on a granite bluff overlooking the Sound, was meant to be the end of the line, a place where the past couldn't find him. But the world has a way of finding its most effective tools. The storm came in from the north, a furious onslaught of wind and rain that turned the sky into a churning bruise of purple and black. It lashed the ancient pines, tearing at them with an elemental rage. Inside the cabin, a fire crackled, a small bubble of warmth against the chaos. Cal cleaned his rifle, the movements economical and precise, a ritual that calmed the tremors he sometimes felt in his hands. Silas lay at his feet, head on his paws, but his ears twitched, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Cal paused, his senses immediately on high alert. The ice-cold focus returned. Silas wasn't growling at the storm. He was growling at something in it. Forged in fire and seeking peace, this warrior was about to learn that his sanctuary was built on a secret, and the storm had just brought a war to his doorstep. Is there someone in your life whose loyalty is absolute? Tell us where you are watching from in the comments, because a prayer is going up for you and your family tonight. Cal placed the rifle down, the metallic click unnaturally loud in the sudden silence between gusts of wind. He moved to the window, peering into the maelstrom. Blackness, rain sheeting down so hard it was like a solid wall of water. He trusted the dog. Always. Silas was on his feet now, a rigid statue of muscle and fur, his gaze locked on the door. Another growl, deeper this time. Not aggression, alert. Cal's mind catalogued the possibilities. Lost hiker. Unlikely in this. Poacher. Possible. Something else. He slipped on a waterproof shell, the fabric rustling like dry leaves. He grabbed a high-powered flashlight and his sidearm, the familiar weight of the Sig Sauer, a grim comfort in his palm. A quiet command. Heel sigh. The dog fell into position at his left leg, moving with a terrifying fluid grace. They stepped out into the tempest. The wind tore the breath from his lungs, and the rain was like 1,000 icy needles against his skin. The beam of the flashlight cut a frantic, dancing tunnel through the darkness, illuminating a world gone wild. Silas led the way, nose to the ground, then lifting to test the air. He was pulling, insistent. They moved through the thrashing trees, away from the bluff, and deeper into the forest. The sound came on the wind, faint and desperate, a human sound, almost swallowed by the storm's fury. It was a cry. Silas led him to a place Cal had only seen once before, a dilapidated hunter's shack from the turn of the century, its roof sagging, its walls leaning as if in surrender to the forest. The door was ajar, banging a frantic, irregular rhythm against its frame. Silas stopped at the threshold, whining softly. Cal swept the flashlight beam inside. The interior was a wreck of rotten wood and damp earth, and in the far corner, huddled beneath a tattered horse blanket, was a figure, a woman. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt and blood, her clothes torn. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of terror and defiance, locked onto his. One of her arms was bound to a heavy iron pipe with a zip tie, the plastic cutting deep into her swollen wrist. She wasn't lost. She was a captive. The world narrowed to the space of that ruined shack. His sanctuary was gone. His peace was a lie. The protector in him, the guardian he had tried so hard to bury, surged to the surface with a chilling certainty. He was no longer a man escaping his past. He was a shield standing between this woman and whatever horrors had left her here to die. "Stay," Cal commanded Silas, who remained poised at the door, a silent, watchful sentinel. Cal entered the shack, his boots sinking into the soft, damp earth of the floor. He kept his weapon low but ready, his eyes scanning the shadows. Empty, for now. He knelt beside the woman, keeping a careful distance. "I'm not going to hurt you." His voice was rough, unused to comforting words. She flinched, but didn't look away. Her gaze was intelligent, assessing him as much as he was assessing her. He could see the sharp mind working behind the pain and fear. "Who did this?" he asked, his tone direct, cutting through the noise of the storm. She shook her head, a tremor running through her. "They'll be back." Her voice was a raw whisper. "They have to come back." It wasn't a plea. It was a statement of fact. A threat. Cal holstered his weapon and pulled a tactical knife from his belt. "Hold still." He carefully sliced through the thick plastic of the zip tie. She gasped as blood rushed back into her hand, her fingers spasming. He saw the deep bruising on her wrists, the gash on her forehead, the exhaustion that clung to her like a shroud. He shrugged off his waterproof shell and draped it over her shoulders. She was shivering violently. "Can you walk?" She nodded, her jaw set with a grim determination that he recognized. It was the look of a survivor. He helped her to her feet, his arm providing a steady support. She was light, too light, but she moved with a purpose that belied her condition. She was a fighter. As they stepped out of the shack, Silas fell in behind them, a rear guard. The journey back to his cabin was a brutal struggle against the elements. The wind howled and the rain was relentless. He half carried her, his own body a shield against the worst of the storm. Back inside his sanctuary, the warmth was a physical shock. He sat her down in a heavy armchair near the fire, Silas immediately taking up a position at her feet, a low, reassuring rumble in his chest. Cal's training took over. He wasn't a man seeking peace anymore. He was a combat medic in a triage situation. He retrieved his extensive first aid kit. "I need to clean that cut on your head," he said. It wasn't a question. She simply nodded, watching him with those same intense, analytical eyes. As he worked, gently cleaning the wound, the silence was thick with unspoken questions. "My name is Aris," she finally said, her voice a little stronger. "Dr. Aris Thorne." He met her gaze. "Cal." He didn't offer more. "They took me from my lab in Seattle," she continued, the words coming faster now. A man named Julian Croft. He owns Ethel Corp. He wanted my research. When I refused, he sent his people. Ethel Corp. Cal had heard of them. A biotech giant, lauded for its philanthropic work. A pristine public image. A dark, violent underbelly. What research? He asked, applying a butterfly bandage to the cut. Aris hesitated, then her eyes hardened. A cure that can also be a plague. He doesn't want to save lives, Cal. He wants to own them. I hid the source data, a single drive. That's why they were keeping me alive. They were trying to break me. The open loop, the mystery, a data drive that held the power to control life and death in the hands of a ruthless corporate villain. Cal finished his work and stood up. His cabin, his fortress of solitude, now felt like the most dangerous place on Earth. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a target. The illusion of safety evaporated in a shatter of glass. Cal had just handed Aris a mug of hot tea when the window over the sink exploded inward. Instinct, sharp and brutal, took over. Down, he roared, shoving Aris toward the floor behind the heavy oak table. Silas was already moving, a black blur of fury launching himself not at the window, but toward the back door, barking with a ferocity that was pure violence. A suppressed gunshot coughed from the darkness outside, a chunk of wood splintering from the doorframe where Silas's head had been a second before. They were professionals. They knew about the dog. Cal didn't return fire. He was escaping. He was a weapon without a target. But now a target had been painted on him. His mind became a machine of angles and priorities. Threat assessment, asset protection, egress routes. Aris was the asset. The cabin was a kill box. He grabbed the rifle he'd been cleaning, the cold steel a familiar and deadly comfort. He moved in a low crouch, his movements the epitome of tactical grace, a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of the storm and the attack. Another suppressed round punched through the wall near the fireplace. They were bracketing him, trying to pin him down. He saw a flicker of movement through the shattered window. A man in black tactical gear, night vision goggles glowing an eerie green. He wasn't alone. How many? Cal's voice was low, devoid of emotion. Aris, her face pale but her eyes clear and focused, pointed toward the front of the cabin. I saw two cross the porch light. Two in front, at least one at the back, Cal calculated. A three-man team, minimum, coordinated, expensive. Croft wasn't sending thugs. He was sending operators. Silas barked again, a sharp, positional sound. He was marking a target. Cal crawled to the side of the back door. He took a deep breath, the air tasting of ozone and cordite. Then he kicked the door open and fired two precise shots into the darkness. A heavy thump, a choked cry. One down. He didn't wait for confirmation. Aris, stay behind me. When I move, you move. Understand? She gave a single, sharp nod. No fear, just readiness. He respected that. He tossed a heavy cast-iron skillet onto the floor in the far corner of the kitchen. The clang was deafening. As predicted, two rounds immediately punched through the wall where the sound had come from. They were using the noise to pinpoint his location. Amateurs in professionals' gear. He used their fire to move, rolling across the floor to the compromised front window. He rose just enough to see a second figure swinging their weapon toward the kitchen. Cal fired once. The figure dropped. He was a protector. He was a guardian. And these men had dared to breach his sanctuary. A cold, concentrated rage settled over him. He grabbed a heavy pack he always kept ready, the go bag. It contained survival gear, ammunition, medical supplies. We're leaving. Now. The cabin, his symbol of peace, was burning. Not from fire, but from the violation. It was no longer a home. It was just a place he used to know. They plunged out the back door and into the raging heart of the storm. The wind was a physical blow, and the rain-soaked ground was a treacherous mire of mud and exposed roots. Cal set a punishing pace, moving with the certainty of a man who knew this terrain as well as he knew the parts of his own rifle. He held Aris's hand, his grip firm, pulling her along in his wake. She didn't complain. She didn't stumble. For a woman who had been a captive only an hour before, she moved with a surprising resilience, her breath coming in ragged but steady gasps. The forest was a labyrinth of black trunks and lashing branches. Behind them, the faint orange glow of his cabin flickered against the low-hanging clouds. They had set it on fire. To erase the evidence, to erase him. It was a statement. Ethel Corp had unlimited resources and zero morality. He felt a flicker of loss for the small piece of peace he had tried to build, but it was immediately replaced by the ice-cold focus of the mission: survival, protection, retribution. He was moving toward a small, concealed cave he'd found months ago, a place not on any map. Their only chance was to disappear into the wilderness, to become ghosts. Silas ranged ahead, a silent shadow that melted into the deeper darkness, his senses, their early warning system. He would occasionally reappear, a faint presence at Cal's side, before vanishing again. He was hunting. Aris slipped, her feet going out from under her on a slick patch of moss-covered rock. Cal caught her, his arm like a steel band around her waist, easily pulling her upright. "Thanks," she managed to say, her voice tight with effort. "You've done this before," he stated, looking at the way she moved, the way she scanned the terrain, even as she fought to keep up. "Not this exactly," she replied, pushing a wet strand of hair from her face. "But I was an Army Ranger, medical officer." The revelation landed with quiet force. Dr. Aris Thorne, former Army Ranger. This changed the calculus. She wasn't just an asset to be protected, she was a partner. She was wounded and exhausted, but she was not fragile. She had a core of tempered steel. He saw the flicker of old training in her eyes, the way she instinctively used the trees for cover, the way her gaze constantly swept their perimeter. She was processing, analyzing, adapting. She was a warrior in her own right, her battlefield the lab, her weapon, her intellect. But the instincts of the field were still there, buried, but not gone. "Good," was all he said, but in that single word she heard the respect. They were no longer a protector and a victim. They were a team. Two operators, vastly different in their skills, now united against a common, relentless enemy. The world had become a cage, but for the first time since he'd left the service, Cal didn't feel trapped. He felt a surge of something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. He was a guardian, and he had found his charge. And she was just as determined to fight as he was. The cave was little more than a deep fissure in a granite cliff face, concealed by a thick curtain of ancient ivy. It was damp and smelled of wet stone and earth, but it was out of the wind and, more importantly, invisible from the air. Cal lit a small, smokeless survival stove, the tiny blue flame casting flickering shadows on the rock walls. The small space was a temporary sanctuary, a pocket of stillness in a world of violent motion. Silas lay at the entrance, a formidable guard dog, his body blocking the opening, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes wide and alert, scanning the storm-tossed forest beyond. Aris sat huddled in a thermal blanket, sipping from a canteen of purified water. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion, but her eyes were still sharp, her mind clearly working. "They won't stop," she said, her voice flat. "Croft doesn't tolerate failure. He'll level this entire mountain to find us, to find the drive." Cal was cleaning his sidearm, the methodical, repetitive motions a form of meditation. "Where is it?" he asked, not looking up. "The drive." She took a deep breath. "In Seattle, secured in a place he would never think to look. A place that requires a specific key, not a physical key." He finally looked at her, his gaze steady. "And what's on it that's worth all this?" This was the moment, the full confession, the reason his life had been irrevocably altered. "Ethel Corp's flagship project is Panacea," she began, her voice low and intense. "It's being hailed as a revolutionary gene therapy that can cure a range of genetic disorders. It's in final trials. The stock is soaring. Croft is being called a savior." She paused, a bitter, grim look on her face. "But it's a lie. My team discovered the truth. Panacea works, but it has a built-in kill switch, a dormant viral sequence that can be activated by a secondary airborne agent. An agent only Ethel Corp can manufacture and release." Cal stopped cleaning his weapon. The world tilted. This wasn't about corporate greed. It was about global control, biological blackmail on an unprecedented scale. "He could hold entire populations hostage," Cal said, the words tasting like ash. "Cure them with one hand, threaten them with the other," Aris confirmed. "The drive contains all the raw data, the molecular modeling, the activation sequences, everything needed to prove it, and everything needed to create a counter-agent. It's his legacy of power, and it's the only thing that can destroy him." Cal finished reassembling his pistol with a final, decisive click. The fog of his quiet life had been burned away, replaced by the stark, terrifying clarity of this new reality. He was no longer just protecting a woman. He was protecting the future from a man who wanted to be a god. "Then we're not running anymore," he said, his voice a low growl of conviction. "We're going back to Seattle. We're going on the offensive. We're going to take his legacy and burn it to the ground." He was a protector, and the entire world had just become his charge. The transition from the raw, untamed wilderness of the Cascades to the concrete and glass canyons of Seattle was a jarring shift in tactics and environment. The Seattle mist was a constant companion, a damp gray breath that clung to the city and gave the air a sharp, clean smell, a stark contrast to the suffocatingly dry air of the Middle Eastern deserts he knew so well. They had acquired an anonymous panel van, its interior stripped bare, paid for with cash from one of Cal's emergency stashes. It was their mobile command center, a bubble of anonymity in a city of millions. Inside, the juxtaposition was stark. Aris, hunched over a ruggedized laptop powered by the van's inverter, looked every bit the digital warrior, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she mapped out the architectural and network schematics of the Ethel Corp Tower. Cal sat opposite her, cleaning and checking their limited arsenal of weapons, his world one of steel, brass, and tactical nylon. Silas lay between them, a silent, grounding presence. His keen senses, so effective in the forest, were now tuned to the urban symphony of sirens, traffic, and the subtle shifts in human tension. The Ethel Tower was a monument to Julian Croft's ego, a shard of glittering black glass that pierced the Seattle skyline. It was a modern fortress, complete with biometric scanners, pressure-plated floors, and a private security force of ex-military contractors. The drive is in a small, climate-controlled, sub-basement archive, Aris explained, pointing to a section of the blueprint on her screen. It's old school. He doesn't trust the cloud with his most valuable secrets. The room is shielded. To get in, you need to bypass 3 electronic checkpoints and 1 human guard post. And the key? Cal asked. It's not a password, she said. It's a bio-signature. Mine. My thumbprint and a retinal scan are required to open the physical safe inside the archive. He set it up that way before I realized his true intentions. A little bit of hubris. He liked the poetry of making me the literal key to his kingdom. A fatal flaw. Croft's arrogance was their biggest exploit. The plan was audacious. They would use a service entrance during a late-night shift change. Silas would be their scout. Cal had fitted him with a small, custom-made harness, carrying a micro-camera and audio sensor. He could move through the ventilation shafts, a ghost in the machine, feeding them real-time intel. They would move through the tower's skeleton, the service corridors and maintenance shafts, bypassing the main security grid. As they geared up in the back of the van, the opulent world of the tower seemed a universe away. Cal in his dark tactical gear, Aris in practical, nondescript clothing. They were the antithesis of Croft's polished, sterile world. "Ready?" Cal asked, his voice low. Aris looked up from her screen, her eyes reflecting the green text. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "Let's go reclaim my work." He was a guardian stepping out of the shadows, and she was the key. Together, they were about to unlock a reckoning. The Protector and the Scientist, moving as one, prepared to infiltrate the heart of the beast. The air in the service corridor was cool and smelled faintly of ozone and industrial cleaner. It was a world away from the plush carpets and polished marble of the Ethel lobby. Here, there were only exposed pipes, bundled cables, and the low hum of the building's circulatory system. Cal moved with an unnatural silence, a large predator in a concrete jungle. Aris followed close behind, her earlier exhaustion burned away by a focused intensity. On the small screen of a wrist-mounted display, Cal watched the feed from Silas's camera. The dog moved through the ventilation ducts with breathtaking speed and silence, the world a fisheye view of metal and darkness. Silas was the perfect scout, his senses detecting the subtle changes in air pressure and scent that signaled the presence of guards long before they appeared on his camera. 2 guards, East Corridor, approaching your junction, Cal whispered into his throat mic. Aris, who was working on a digital lock on a service panel, didn't look up. "Copy. Give me 10 seconds. Her fingers danced over a small tablet connected to the panel's wiring. The light on the lock blinked from red to green. She pulled the panel open just as the guard's footsteps became audible. They slipped inside the narrow crawl space, pulling the panel shut behind them. They waited in the cramped darkness, listening as the 2 men walked past, their conversation about a recent football game echoing in the corridor before fading away. They moved on. Their objective was the sub-basement, a place of deep storage and forgotten files. According to Aris's intel, it was manned by a single, complacent overnight guard. As they descended the final flight of concrete stairs, Silas's feed confirmed it. A lone man sat at a metal desk watching a movie on a tablet, a half-eaten bag of chips beside him. The archive room door was thick steel, with a biometric keypad next to it. Silas, having exited a vent behind the guard's desk, let out a single, low whine. The guard startled, spinning around in his chair. "What the... Where did you come from?" He stood up, bewildered, and took a step toward the dog. In that moment of distraction, Cal emerged from the stairwell. He moved with swift, silent purpose. It was over in seconds. The guard was disarmed and subdued with a chokehold that rendered him unconscious, not dead. Cal secured him with zip ties. Justice, not vengeance. Aris stepped up to the archive door. She placed her thumb on the scanner. A green light. Then she leaned into the retinal scanner. Another satisfying chime. With a heavy hiss of hydraulics, the massive steel door unlatched. They were in. The room was cold, the air sterile. Rows of metallic shelves held countless numbered hard cases. Aris went straight to a specific shelf, her hands tracing the labels. "Here," she said, her voice tight with emotion. She pulled down a silver, hard case. It wasn't locked. She opened it. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was a single, black data drive. She held it up, a small, unassuming object that held the power to topple an empire. A triumphant smile touched her lips for the first time, but as she turned back to Cal, the smile vanished. Standing in the open doorway, flanked by two massive men in sharp suits, was Julian Croft. He held a silver whistle to his lips. He wasn't smiling. He was applauding, a slow, deliberate clap that echoed in the cold, sterile room. "Bravo, Dr. Thorne, bravo," Croft said, his voice smooth and laced with venomous amusement. "You brought the key right to me. And you," he said, his cold eyes landing on Cal, "brought the muscle, a perfect, self-contained delivery system. I do appreciate the efficiency." The air in the archive turned electric. Croft's arrogance was a tangible force, a suffocating blanket of smug superiority. He stood there, framed by his two bodyguards, men who were clearly not just suit fillers. They had the hard, dead eyes of seasoned killers. Cal instinctively moved to place himself partially in front of us, a subtle shift that made him the primary target. Silas, who had been standing near Aris, let out a low, menacing growl, the fur on his back ridged. His body was coiled like a spring, ready to launch. "The dog," Croft said with a dismissive wave of his hand, as if shooing a fly. "Always the dramatic accessories. Please, Cal. May I call you Cal? I had my people run your profile. Caleb Rourke, a decorated ghost, disappeared after Kandahar, a man looking for peace. And you found this." He gestured around the sterile room. "Someone else's war, a futile gesture of a bygone morality." Cal's face was a mask of cold fury. His dialogue was sparse, but his presence spoke volumes. He was a weapon, and Croft had just aimed him. "It's over, Croft," Aris said, her voice shaking but defiant. She clutched the data drive to her chest. "This drive will expose everything." Croft laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "My dear doctor, you still think this is about exposure, about the court of public opinion? I am the court. I own the labs, the media outlets that would report on it, and the politicians who would prosecute it. That drive isn't a key to my destruction. It was the key to my final security protocol. Your biosignature, linked to that specific drive, was the only thing preventing a complete data purge. By bringing it here, you've brought it to the one place it can be safely destroyed." He nodded to his men. "Take it from her." The man on the right started to move. He was big, but he was clumsy. Cal saw it in his footwork, the slight hesitation. He was muscle, not a practitioner. The man on the left, however, was different. He moved with a liquid economy, his eyes never leaving Cal. He was the real threat. As the first man reached for Aris, Silas exploded into action. He was not a pet. He was a weapon system. He launched himself at the man's extended arm, his jaws locking on with ferocious power. The man screamed, a high, piercing sound of agony and surprise. In that split second of chaos, Cal moved. He didn't go for the second guard. He went for Croft. It was the one move they wouldn't expect. He lunged forward, closing the distance in 2 powerful strides. He wasn't trying to kill him. He was trying to take the asset. He grabbed Croft, spinning him around to use as a human shield against the second, more dangerous guard. "Drop it!" Cal snarled at the guard. The barrel of his Sig Sauer pressed hard against Croft's temple. The guard hesitated, his own weapon raised, his face a mask of conflict. Croft, however, just smiled, a chilling, reptilian grin. "You think I'm afraid to die, soldier?" he whispered, his voice calm. "I'm a visionary. My legacy is already secured. You, on the other hand—" He brought the silver whistle to his lips and blew a single, piercingly high-pitched note. It wasn't a signal for his men. Silas, still attached to the first guard's arm, yelped in pain and collapsed, his body convulsing. The sound was an ultrasonic weapon, targeted, precise, and agonizing. It was designed for one purpose, to neutralize his most loyal protector. The world went silent for Cal. The screams, the struggle, the cold voice of Croft, it all faded into a dull roar. All he could see was Silas, his powerful body twitching on the cold floor, a soft, pained whimper escaping his lips. A cold, concentrated rage, purer and more absolute than anything he had ever felt in combat, flooded him. This was not tactical. This was personal. The second guard, seeing Cal's momentary distraction, made his move. He lunged, not with his gun, but with a combat knife, aiming for Cal's weapon hand. But Cal wasn't distracted. He was focused. He shoved Croft violently into the guard's path, breaking the man's charge. In the same fluid motion, he pivoted, firing 2 rounds into the guard's kneecaps. The man went down with a sickening crack of bone. His scream gargled. The first guard, his arm mangled and useless, tried to draw a sidearm with his left hand. Aris, seeing the move, acted without hesitation. She swung the heavy silver hard case with all her might, connecting squarely with the side of the man's head. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious. It was just Cal and Croft. Croft, his suit now disheveled, had lost his smug composure. For the first time, a flicker of genuine fear appeared in his eyes. He saw the look on Cal's face. It was the look of a man with nothing left to lose. "He's just a dog," Croft stammered, taking a step back. Cal advanced on him, his movements deliberate, terrifying. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He was an executioner. He raised his pistol, the aim unwavering. "He was my partner," Cal said, his voice a low, deadly whisper. Aris rushed to Silas's side, her medical training kicking in. "Cal, don't!" she yelled, her hands running over the dog's trembling body. "Killing him won't help Silas. We need to get him out of here, now." Her voice cut through the red haze of his anger. She was right. Vengeance was a luxury. His duty was to his partner, his protector. He lowered the pistol. He looked at Croft, who was backed against a shelf of data archives, his face pale with sweat. Cal would not make him a martyr. He would give him a fate far worse. He would let him live to see his empire, his legacy, crumble into dust. With a final swift movement, Cal struck Croft across the face with the butt of his pistol, not to kill, but to stun. As Croft slumped to the ground, dazed, Cal turned his back on him. The fight was over. He scooped Silas's limp body into his arms. The dog was heavy, a dead weight, but Cal held him as if he were made of glass. He looked at Aris, the data drive still clutched in her hand. "Let's go," he said, his voice thick with a pain that had nothing to do with any physical wound. He was a guardian, and his charge was dying. They left Croft and his broken men in the cold, sterile archive, a tomb for a fallen king, and walked out into the city, carrying the two things that mattered most, the key to justice and the life of a loyal friend. The days that followed were a blur of antiseptic smells and the quiet, rhythmic beeping of machines. They found a 24-hour veterinary emergency clinic in an industrial part of Tacoma, a place that didn't ask too many questions when a grim-faced man and a determined woman brought in a Belgian Malinois suffering from severe neurological trauma, paying in cash. Aris, with the data drive secured, had made one anonymous, encrypted call to a trusted contact at the Department of Justice and another to a firebrand journalist she knew from her college days. The fallout was apocalyptic. The Panacea story broke, and it was a firestorm. Ethel Corp's stock didn't just fall, it evaporated. Julian Croft, found by the authorities amidst the wreckage of his own security team, was arrested. His claims of a violent corporate espionage attack fell apart under the weight of the data on the drive. His legacy was not one of a visionary. It was one of a sociopath who saw humanity as a commodity. His world, his power, his name, all turned to ash, but Cal saw none of it. His world had shrunk to the four walls of the small private recovery room at the back of the vet clinic. He sat in a hard plastic chair, his hand resting on Silas's flank, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest. The ultrasonic weapon had caused a series of micro-seizures, a brutal assault on the dog's brain. For 2 days, it was uncertain if he would wake up. Cal didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He just sat, a guardian on his final watch. Aris was his lifeline. She brought him coffee and food he didn't touch. She handled the logistics, ensuring their tracks were covered, creating a new, clean identity for him. For them. She was his shield in the world outside, just as he had been hers in the wild. On the 3rd day, as the morning sun cast long shadows across the floor, Silas stirred. His tail gave a weak, tentative thump against the bedding. Just once. Then his eyes fluttered open. They were cloudy, unfocused at first, but then they found Cal. A low whine rumbled in his chest. Cal leaned forward, his forehead resting against the dog's head. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The silent pact between them was reaffirmed. The storm was over. Aris stood in the doorway, a small, hopeful smile on her face. She looked at Cal, the stoic warrior, the protector, and saw the cracks in his armor, not as weaknesses, but as the places where the light was finally getting in. He wasn't a weapon without a target anymore. He had a pack. "The DOJ is offering you a full pardon and a new identity," she said softly. "They want you to consult, to help build a team that can handle situations like this." Cal looked up from Silas, his eyes meeting hers. He saw the future not as an escape, but as a continuation. He was no longer a man running from his past. He had found his purpose again, not in the solitude of the mountains, but in the fierce loyalty of the two souls standing with him. He was a guardian. He was a protector, and his duty had just begun. He simply nodded. That was all the answer she needed. True loyalty is the greatest sanctuary. If you believe in the power of a faithful heart, comment Amen below. God bless you and your families.